Okay. Hi, everyone. Today marks the first of a three-part series called Unbagging the Biology of Bagworms. We're kicking things off with exploring learning standards pertaining to the practice of science through today's presentation. What is a lepidopterist and how does that relate to bagworms? In fact, what is a bagworm? You'll be in the know shortly when we turn things over to our two scientists and bagworm experts, Akito Kawahara and Andrew Mung, and some of their lab members. For all of our attendees on the call today, you can use the chat feature to write any questions for our scientists, and we will be addressing those questions towards the end of today's presentation. So please keep the questions coming. Before turning it over to Akito, we want to make sure that teachers in schools know that you can have a scientist speak with your classroom at any time by visiting the Scientist in Every Florida School website at bit.ly/SEFS site. We are a free program with the mission to engage Florida K through 12 teachers and students in cutting edge research by providing science role models like today and experiences that we hope inspire you to be future stewards of our planet. And this program is also made possible thanks to our wonderful scientist experts, Dr. Akito Kawahara and Dr. Andrew Mung, who are part of the McGuire Center for Lepidoptera, and Dr. Andrew Mung is part of the Department of Entomology and Nematology, and of course, Alberto Lopez, who's the manager of museum education at the Florida Museum of Natural History. And we're Stephanie Killingsworth, your education and outreach coordinator, and I'm Lexi Bolger, an outreach assistant for the Scientists in Every Florida School program. And at this time, we like to turn things over to our scientists.
Okay, hey everybody. I'm Akito Kawahara, and Andrew is on the call as well on the Zoom. Can everybody see this? Good. Okay. So today we're going to talk about bagworms. Bagworms are amazing, and this is, as Lexi mentioned, this is a three-part series. We're going to talk to you and tell you all about bagworms from, the diversity of the different kinds of bagworms that are out there. What they do and why they're so interesting. What our project is doing at the University of Florida to study these bagworms. But we're going to first start today, kind of really broadly, to talk about what is a lepidopterist and what is Lepidoptera? So I'm going to start off here, and then I'm going to have Andrew kind of pop in periodically on a few slides. And then at the end, we'll have time to take questions. So here we go. So let's see. Let me just make sure it's okay here. Okay. Okay, so what is Lepidoptera? Let's start there. So Lepidoptera is the word for butterflies and moths, and it's actually made up of two different words, or two parts of one word. And the first part is lepi, which means scales, and doptera means winged organism. So butterflies and moths, or Lepidoptera, are scale-winged insects, and all lepidopterans, all of the species of butterflies and moths that you see, have scaled wings. So if you zoom into the wings of a butterfly, so if you ever find a butterfly like in your yard or something, and if you look at it really up close, even with your cell phone, and kind of zoom in, sometimes you can even see these amazing scales. And it's really incredible because the scales can produce the colors, and they also reflect different kinds of light to make these beautiful colors and patterns. And if you touch the scales, oftentimes they'll come off of the wings. So they're not permanent, but it doesn't really damage the butterfly if you just, if a little bit of the scales come off. Oftentimes, a butterfly or a moth that has kind of been living for a long time and is pretty old will have lost a lot of its scales because it has been using its wings to fly around. I'll also say that the scales also help because it repels water. So if it's raining and the butterfly gets wet or the moth gets wet, the scales help the droplets of water come off of the body. So this is just a picture of lots of different kinds of butterflies and moths. But a lot of these actually are moths and not butterflies. Can you guys guess which ones are butterflies and moths? And I know we probably can't do an answer directly here, but you guys can do it like in your classrooms. And I'm just going to say that many of these actually are moths. the butterflies, there's only, I think, what, four or five of them in this whole picture are butterflies. So moths, oftentimes we think of moths as being kind of brown and kind of ugly, and they come to your porch light and they're not that exciting. But there's a lot of them that are really beautiful. And when you stop and look at them carefully, you'll notice that there's incredible colors and patterns and shapes, and they're absolutely beautiful. And this is just the adults, right? There's also the caterpillars, which are super cool as well. So, how many species of Lepidoptera or butterflies and moths are there out there? There's about 160,000 species, we think. That's just the described ones. There's many, many more that scientists are currently describing. And as part of this bagworm project, we're also describing new species of bagworms that we recently found in Costa Rica, which maybe Andrew will talk about briefly in one of the seminars upcoming. Um, the uh, the number of moths is significantly more than the number of butterflies. There's about 140,000 species of the 160 are thought to be moths, and only about 20,000 are thought to be butterflies. And we only say only 20,000, but that's still a lot, right? There's a lot of butterflies all over the world. And common species that we can find here in Florida include things like monarch butterflies, cabbage butterfly. There's also zebra longwing, swallowtails, etc. And those all go into that 20,000 species of butterflies, and they live all over the world. And what do they do? So many of these butterflies and moths are really important pollinators. So many times you'll see them in your yard and they'll come to flowers and they're taking nectar, but they're also moving around between the flowers and they're bringing pollen to the flowers, and that way the plants can survive. So they have a really important duty that they do for the environment. Um, so they're very important. And many moths are also really important pollinators because lots of flowers only bloom at night. We oftentimes only see the flowers that are blooming during the day, but at night there's special flowers that just bloom then, and they're waiting for the moths to come. So moths are also really important pollinators. They also, moths and butterflies are also food for birds and bats and frogs and all kinds of wildlife here. There was a study that showed that about 95% of the songbirds that you hear in your yard feed on caterpillars. So caterpillars, which are the larvae or the young immature stage of the moth or butterfly, they are very important as food sources. They also help produce silk. So the picture on the left here is a picture of a domesticated silkworm moth, and it is what makes silk. So silk for clothing comes from this insect, and without that insect, um, we wouldn't have silk. And also now there's a couple of moth species that we now know that can eat plastic, and so there's this really interesting new research that's being done on trying to use these moths to remove plastic waste from oceans and things like that to help the environment. So it can get really big. So here's a picture of an atlas moth. When the museum, currently the museum, the Florida Museum of Natural History McGuire Center is closed, but starting next fall, we're hoping to be open again. And one of the moths we have on display oftentimes is this one, and this is called the atlas moth. It's one of the biggest in the world. It's bigger than your hand. And then there's another one that's also really big. This is called the white witch moth. This one's found in South America, but they get really big as well. And they're really incredible when you see them in real life. I still remember seeing one myself, and I was so excited as a kid. Some of them also are tiny, right? So also, this is a picture of a tiny micro moth, and you can actually see the veins on the leaf. So this is a moth that's sitting on the leaf. It's about half a millimeter. So it's a tiny, tiny moth, but this is also a little moth, and it has an important duty in nature as well. So what is a lepidopterist? A lepidopterist can really be anybody who studies butterflies and moths. So it's a person who studies butterflies and moths. And, there's a picture of my daughter. I don't know if my daughter's on this call, but she'd probably feel like embarrassed that I'm saying this right now. But she's also, I would say, is a lepidopterist too, because she was collecting caterpillars and rearing them and studying them and so forth. And the picture on the left is a picture of my sister and I from when we were really young in Japan. studying butterflies. So anybody can really be a lepidopterist. All of you guys can be a lepidopterist if you're interested in studying butterflies and moths. Okay, so this is Andrew's slide, I believe. Andrew, do you
Yep.
want to say a few words?
Yeah. Thanks, Akito. Yeah, so I just wanted to also say that studying butterflies and moths takes a lot of different forms. So I think a lot of the fun and exciting parts for folks are going out into the field, discovering new things, and collecting in nature, like on the left there. But Lepidopterists also work in the lab where we can perform more tightly controlled experiments. That's a very old photo of me when I was in grad school, but rearing some monarch butterflies in those cages. That's a zoom in there because sometimes we just can't get the level of control we need in the field. So lab scientists can be lepidopterists. And nowadays, I spend a lot of my time on the computer because I do the genomes, sequencing the DNA of butterflies and moths. So it can be a very modern and high-tech science as well. So being a lepidopterist means you're studying butterflies and moths, but it still gives you a lot of options for how you want to do that.
Okay, so we're going to talk now about bagworms. Andrew and I and several folks on this call are completely fascinated, and we love bagworms. We're always talking about bagworms, and the more this project continues, it started last year. We got the funding to do this project about a year ago, and ever since then, my love for bagworms has just exponentially grown. And uh, now, whenever I see a bagworm, I run to it and try to check it out and everything. So this is just a picture of a common bagworm that you might kind of see that they oftentimes look like this. So this is the caterpillar that makes this case. And so we call them bagworms because they make these bags. Oftentimes you'll see them, like I said before, like in your yard. You can find them in kind of anywhere around the house, outside, in nature, if you're taking a walk. But they look kind of like this often. But others look a little bit different as well. So here's a bunch of photos of different kinds of bagworms from around the world. The one on the bottom right is kind of the one we were kind of showing, kind of the one that puts together bits of sticks together and lives. And so the caterpillar lives inside of that bag. And the other ones on top, A, B, and C, you can even see the caterpillar in two of them. So it's carrying this little case around and it's walking around and it's made this little hut. The one in the middle looks like a little hat. The one on the right is a spirally log cabin shaped one that we really like. There's also these really interesting ones on the bottom left there in D that have these uh, beautiful little pieces of leaves that they put together, and they carry these little houses around with them, and they live their entire life inside this little case. Um, oh, Andrew, do you want to say something about this one?
Sure. Just a little bit more. Yeah, I think you've already seen this is just some more diversity of the different types of cases. So lots of times they're using leaves and sticks from the environment, but also sometimes they'll take in dirt, like the snail case bagworm that's on um, that board there that makes the kind of spiral out of silk and sand grains, or sometimes those kind of gross, snotty hanging down cases from the logs there are made out of basically sawdust or decaying wood. And so these are just really cool little insects that can use whatever they find in the environment to make a home that stays with them. You can almost think it's sort of similar to a hermit crab in that it carries its house with it, but it's more impressive because instead of just finding a shell that already exists, the bagworm is making its own home and adding to it as it grows and keeping it throughout its life up until it matures. So that's all I was going to say there.
Yeah, thank you. So as Andrew mentioned, there's many different kinds of shapes and things like this of bagworms. The snail one's especially interesting because it really doesn't even look like a bagworm. It just kind of looks like a snail, you know, a snail-shaped sandy thing. So the point also is that like if you go out in your yard or in the woods and you find anything interesting, take a look. A lot of times there's some interesting, cool stuff here. I had no idea some of these are bagworms until some of the folks here on the call taught me about this stuff, and it's just, we learn from each other, and it's really an incredible process. Um, Andrew, do you want to talk about this? I mean, I can talk about this too, but this is kind of your cup of tea, maybe.
Sure. Either way. Yeah, so another cool thing about bagworms is when they become adults, they don't metamorphose necessarily like you'd expect a butterfly or moth to. So you've maybe learned about the stages of the life cycle. A caterpillar makes a chrysalis or a cocoon wrapped around that pupa and then emerges as an adult winged moth or butterfly. And so males do the same thing in bagworms. But a lot of the times the females don't. They turn into this grub-like or worm-like critter that you see on the blue background there. And so their development and the way the adults look is so different from most other moths that it's one of the things that I was really excited about studying and just trying to understand how that happens, how they've come to be so different from all the other moths.
Yeah, thank you. And some species have females that do have wings as well. So it's this really interesting phenomenon that's happened where lots of uh, or the males of most species have these fully winged. They look like a moth, but the females sometimes look like a caterpillar. So what's going on there? And Andrew's really an expert on this, trying to understand the genetics of how this might happen. So yeah, so this is actually a male bagworm in someone's hand mating with a female. So somebody, we've been asked oftentimes in the past, like, how does mating happen if a female's in the bag and like a caterpillar? So the male actually comes to the bag and mates with the female in this kind of way. It's pretty bizarre, very unusual. A lot of things look like bagworms. So the picture on the left here is a pine cone from a pine tree, and the one on the right is actually a bagworm. So I always wonder, like, is this sort of some kind of camouflage? And I kind of think it is, but I don't know if anyone's really looked at that. But a lot of bagworms look like, uh, plant matter or things that are kind of hanging off of trees and stuff. So they're kind of hard to find, and you kind of need to have this sort of the eyes of finding a bagworm to be able to look for these. And I think over time we've gotten better and better at it. And so bagworms are kind of everywhere. There's even characters in anime. So Burmy from Pokemon, I believe this comes from a bagworm and carries this little like case-like structure, lives inside of this case. The picture on the right is actually a Japanese candy. So I'm Japanese and originally from Japan, and whenever I see interesting things, I take pictures of it. This is a candy wrapper that talks about bug collecting. So there's like a candy inside, but on the very top is a little bagworm. So that got me really excited that bagworms have a place in even at the candy store. I wanted to just add this. So I just added this in about iNaturalist, but you know, if you're going out into the woods, and we're gonna talk about this more in one of the other series that are upcoming. But if you take pictures of these things that you see, plants, insects, even bagworms, you can upload it to this uh, server called iNaturalist, which you can download onto your phone, and it can help you identify the organisms that are out there. And it's a really great tool. A lot of us scientists use this tool to help identify things, but also iNaturalist collects data, and we as scientists can use those data for our research as well. So we always try to encourage folks to take pictures of things and upload it to iNaturalist, because not only will it tell you what the thing might be, but it also collects the information about where that organism was and where at what point in time. So we'll talk more about this um, in one of the upcoming webinars. Andrew, do you want to talk about this, or I guess we can both talk about this? But this is a collaborative team, but we've been doing this together with Andrew's lab and my lab, and some of the folks that are shown here are folks that are involved in this project. Some of them are here on the call right now, I believe.
Yeah,
Oh, there you go.
I was going to say, do you want to have anyone who's on the call
Oh yeah,
briefly introduce themselves? I'm
yeah,
not,
sure,
I
that would be
think
great.
some people aren't here, but I think David is for sure.
Hey,
Sure.
can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey, David.
Uh, hey, my name's David, and I am a PhD student in Akito's lab, and my PhD dissertation is mostly about like doing molecular works of the molecular phylogenetics of the family of bagworm moths. So, basically, I'm very interested in collecting them, studying them, and we're also trying to discover some of the weird species that we found in Costa Rica. Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, thanks, David. So David just used the term molecular phylogenetics. And so just so everyone's on the same page, what that means is a family tree of bagworms. So we think about, there's a lot of bagworms out there, species. We think, right now there's about 1,300 species that are described, but there's probably many, many more. And David's trying to build a family tree to see how they're all related to each other using genetic data. So that's David's project. And I think that's pretty much it. I have a little slide at the end, which is, does anybody else is Christina here or anybody else? Sorry, I didn't mean to. Do we have anybody else that wants to introduce themselves? Andrew, or?
I don't
Hi,
see anybody yet.
can you all hear me?
Yes.
Cool. I can't enable my video, I don't think, but I'm Christina, so you can look at my photo there. And I'm still kind of discovering what specific little area of bagworms interests me the most. They are so diverse and so interesting that I'm actually struggling to choose a specific topic, but I'm really interested in their physical characteristics. So the female versus male winglessness, for instance, and the genetic mechanisms behind what's happening there. So working quite closely with Andrew Mong on that portion of things.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. Um, and yeah, we're going to just end with a little comic thing here. But this is basically what we kind of think about bagworms. There's 1,300 bagworm species or types out there. They're super diverse in terms of the case forms. And they have this really bizarre mating strategy where females can't fly and males fly around. And so the males have to come to her, and then the female walks around and lays her eggs. So at this point, I guess we could stop and take questions, and anything you have questions about what it means to be a lepidopterist or bagworms or anything about this kind of stuff, we're happy to answer.
All right, that's my cue now. I guess I get to take over the stream and get us ready to transition over to our Q&A portion of the live stream so we could get some answers to your questions. Keto, Andrew, thank you so much for teaching us about what Lepidopterist and bagworms are today. It's been so interesting to learn from you. My mind was blown today. I definitely learned some new stuff today. So if any of our attendees have any questions, please go ahead and write them in the chat box and I'll ask on your behalf. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple of seconds here to write down your questions. I already have some great questions and I'm going to start off with this first question from Mr. Richard's class wants to know, what sorts of tools do you use to capture moths and butterflies?
Yeah, so I could answer that one. So we use a butterfly net oftentimes to catch butterflies and moths that are flying around. So these are the adults. But for the bagworm project, we're really interested in the bagworm larvae. So the adults are really hard to catch. They sometimes we'll set these light traps out at night, and what that does is we go to a forest or something and we put a light up on a sheet. We put a vertical white sheet and it reflects the light off of it, and bugs fly to it. And so we can attract insects that way and look for bagworms. But bagworms, for whatever reason, they're not really attracted to light that often. And again, the males only fly, right? So the females are typically not flying. So for bagworms, the better way of looking for these things is walking around. So, Andrew and David and I, we went to Costa Rica on this field trip in in May, and we were just with a bunch of folks. We would walk around in the forest and just look around. And some people, they're amazing at finding these things, and they would use these little, tubes and things. So we'd collect them and put them in a little vial, and then we bring them back to lab, and then we look at them under a microscope. And that's when you start to see all this incredible stuff. Like, oh, look at this one that has these amazing shapes. Look at this one uses sand or, other kinds of insect debris or whatever it is. And uh, so yeah, so those are the kinds of tools we typically use. I hope that answers the question.
Pretty cool. All right. So I have a question here from Ariel Leacock's class is wondering if the wings are made of something that may be itchy.
So most butterflies and moths, so I mentioned that butterflies and moths have scales on the wings, and that's how they, use them for protection, repels water, and all these kinds of things, colors, etc. Um, the scales, if for human beings generally, it's not a problem. I'd say 99% of the moths and butterflies will not harm you in any way. There are a few species that are pretty rare and unusual, in which sometimes the scales, if you inhale the scales, they can go into your, lungs and it can bother you. So as long as you're not doing stuff like that, I would say they're totally fine. And if the question was about getting like itchy like rashes on your skin, that typically does not happen with butterflies and moths. It's not like some plants or anything like that. Caterpillars, sometimes you have to be a little careful with, but generally speaking, the adult moths and butterflies are fine.
Yeah, I was going to say on that, right? Some of the fuzzy caterpillars can have sort of irritating hairs. Um, and I guess it's really, really rare, but you can become kind of allergic to some moth scales. I did this because I've worked with them for so long, and it feels a little bit like just a normal allergy if you mess with them too much for too long. But yeah, nothing really worrying.
Awesome.
So can I just mention one more thing?
Oh, go
Sorry,
ahead.
Alberto.
Yeah, go right ahead.
So the Andrew just mentioned hairy caterpillars, and I think this is a good point. Oftentimes the smooth caterpillars, like sometimes you'll find like a green caterpillar on a like parsley plant or something in your yard. The green or the smooth caterpillars tend not to be the ones that cause irritation. If there is any that do, it tends to be the ones that kind of they're spiny or kind of hairier. So, if you see something like that, they're just using that to protect themselves from all the birds and the lizards that have been introduced around here, and so it's a protection, right? They have a coat that they use for them to protect themselves from predators. So I would just I wouldn't crush them or try to hurt them or anything like that, but just kind of just make sure you don't come in contact with it if you're concerned about that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
you can use a stick to move them out of the way or something. You can get them to crawl onto a stick if they're
Give them a little
like on the
nudge.
path. Yeah.
All right. So Jennifer asks, are bagworms found in every state in the US? And are there any in Florida?
I'm going to let one of you guys talk about
I
this
was gonna
one.
say, should we have David answer this?
Yeah, I think David should answer this one.
Yeah, sure, of course. So, in the States, bagworms can be found in most states, I would say. Especially here in Florida, we got the most common ones that I think people use as the background here is the Abbott's bagworm. So you can basically found Abbott's bagworm in a lot in Florida, but throughout the presentation, there's another bagworm look like the pine tree. So that's called the evergreen bagworms. So the evergreen bagworms can be mostly found in northern states, like colder states, because it's more like a cold species, if you would say. So yeah, my answer to that is that you can find bagworms in mostly all the states. But however, other than these big chunky bagworms, there's still some bagworms that are fairly tiny, and it's gonna require some good eyes and good observation to find them.
Hey, David, do you want to tell them about the biggest bagworm in the world?
Sure. So, as far as we know, the largest bagworms is only is not the largest bagworm we call it Matura, So Matura is only distributed in Australia, and the case of Matura can large to about like 20 centimeters, so which is like 7 or 8 inch, like pretty big. It's a
Yeah,
pretty big
like this
bag.
big. Yeah,
Yes.
really big.
All right. Um, so I have Kathleen is asking, what is the lifespan of a bagworm?
Okay, so that's a good question. So a lot of the times, like the typical bagworms we can find, um, normally the adult female don't actually lay eggs like other butterflies and moths. So after they have this weird reproductive biology is that after their mother dies, the baby caterpillars kind of emerge from their dead mother's corpse and kind of build these tiny little bags from their dead mother's corpse and also the materials collected from their mother's back. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but when they're first born as a neonates is like baby caterpillars. So they're fairly tiny and they use the materials I mentioned to build like very tiny bags. And throughout their lifespan, they just enlarge their bags over and over again. So like the tiny bags eventually is gonna grow, and until it's fixed to the adult size. So I saw some other questions are asking about how do they build the bag. So basically, like I said, when they newly hatched, they collect materials from their dead mother's corpse and also from their mother's bag, and also to collect the materials from the environment and kind of spin them up using their silk and in to enlarge the bags bigger and bigger throughout their growth. And most of the bagworms, their lifespan are around like a year probably, because the diversity of bagworms is very incredible, and we're not very certain about if all of the bagworms are all having similar lifespan, but most of the species that we can expect here in US are around a year. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
some
I'll
of the, like the
just
really big ones. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just gonna relate it to when I was in school, we raised monarch caterpillars. I think a lot of people have, and or maybe painted ladies, and they're pretty quick to develop. I think it's about a month to go from caterpillar to butterfly there, maybe a little bit more. But yeah, the bagworm caterpillars building these bags, a lot of them, especially the ones you find here in the US, the big ones, it'll take them 4 or 5 months to totally mature. So a lot slower than a lot of the butterflies you'd be used to.
Right. And someone had a sort of a related question to that. So is the bag in a bagworm, is it like the cocoon?
It's like the shelter, so it's like a house that it carries around, sort of like I think the analogy was given earlier about like a snail or a hermit crab. Kind of the same idea, except they never leave. They always stay with the bag. Like they'll never like switch bags or anything like that.
Okay. So then in the bag, they make a cocoon.
Right. They become the so they live their pretty much their whole life inside the bag, and then the males will come outside and fly away. If it's a female, oftentimes just stay inside of the bag. So they turn into pupa, which is the one of the stages, and before becoming an adult inside the bag.
Very interesting. Well, and this is a very important question here. I think this is a great question that we should address. It is from Mrs. Skeet's classroom. How can you tell apart butterflies and moths?
Um, so in butterflies and moths, so this is a great question. Um, and yeah, in the earlier slide, I said that there's 20,000 species of butterflies. Um, so generally speaking, so scientifically, uh, butterflies are actually just day flying moths. Like in a when you think of it in evolutionary context, they're just these. There's no real big difference. But for identification purposes, we oftentimes say, okay, this is a butterfly and this is a moth. And one general way of telling a butterfly apart from a moth is that their antennae, like the two antennae that are on their heads, tend to have a club at the tip, or they're kind of enlarged towards the tip. Whereas in moths, it's oftentimes very slender, or it's what we call plumose, like this very hairy antennae. And so if you see a lepidopteran, butterfly or moth that has very hairy antennae or very slender antennae, that's oftentimes, almost always, a moth. And those that have an antennae that have a club on the tip are butterflies. That's kind of the general way we tell them apart.
Excellent. All right, let's see. And by the way, guys, these are all amazing questions, so please keep them coming. I have here Mrs. Dobson's class wants to know how many type of bagworms are there?
David, you want to take it?
Sure. If you're asking how many species of bagworms, currently there's recognized 1300s, around 1300s. But if you're asking like the types, if you're asking like, how many species of them are with fully developed wings and how many species of them are wingless, I would say about like 60 to 80% of them you can found I would say you can expect them to be wingless, because most of them you can found the big bags, that the big guys, big chunky guys you can found in the field are oftentimes wingless. And so I'm not sure if that answers the question, if the type that you're asking is this.
Yeah, I think it was going at that at how many different species are there. And kind of, I think David, stay on there because this is probably going to go to you
Yep,
too.
yep.
Are there any invasive species of bagworms?
Yes, absolutely. So as like all the other species, bagworms also do have some invasive species. And matter of fact, we also have invasive bagworms here in the States. So in the northern states like Michigan, New York, and all these northern states, oftentimes the bagworm you can find, other than the evergreen bagworm, the big guy, there's one smaller bagworms. The name is called Psychicasta, and Psychicasta is originally from Europe. And also there's another invasive species that Andrew just showed throughout the slides, the snail looking like thing. That one is also originally from Europe as well. So yeah, there's definitely invasive species of bagworms, yes.
All right, this is an interesting question from Mrs. Hickman's class. How do the bagworms not fall off when they are building homes on a branch?
I guess I'll still take that question. So for most of the bagworms, while they're crawling on the branch, on the leaves, or anywheres at the outside environment, um, they it looks like they're just crawling, but actually they also spit a lit like they also spit very, very teeny tiny silk while they're walking. So basically they build a ladder, silk ladder, while they're walking. So on the surface, there's a research about there's one research about a big bagworm. While they're climbing, they actually build a zigzag silk. So basically, they build the silk and crawl. Like while they're walking, they build the silk ladder at the same time. So basically, they're crawling on the ladder while making the ladder. I'm not sure if that makes sense. So, and that's one strategy that avoids them, getting blown away by strong winds, or if there's an animal crush into in the tree, it's how they make sure that they don't fall off.
So can I just mention one thing real quick here? So bagworms are also amazing because they have a silk gland. So they have a gland inside their body that's really big. So compared to other caterpillars, they produce a ton of silk. And that's because they have to make the bag and hold it together with silk. So the silk holds the bag together. But they also use the silk, as David mentioned, to hold on to things, right? To crawl up things and make silk ladders and stuff. And they walk along these ladders and so forth. But one other thing that they do, because the females can't fly, right? There's no way of the female to go far. So one thing that they do, which is really interesting, and some spiders also do this, but it's called ballooning. So when the bagworm is really tiny, they'll create a silken thread and they'll use the wind to kind of hang themselves off of a, with thread off of a leaf or a branch, and then they just let go and they fly somewhere. And they use the wind to go places. So if you imagine like, in the air, there's like these tiny little bagworms sort of floating around. That's what they do. And that's how they ended up, there's a species of bagworm in Hawaii, and I don't know if we know how it got there, but I always wondered like maybe just kind of flew there through the air or something like that. So there's all these interesting things that these bagworms do, and silk is a very important part of it.
All right. I have here a question from Miss Colon's class. Wants to know, what do bagworms eat?
So yeah, it's a very good question. So most of the bagworms you can find, they are generalists. So what is generalist? That basically means that generalist basically means that it feeds on a lot of things. So basically you can find it on palm tree, you can find them on like evergreen trees, you can find them on small branches just at your garden, or small plants that you plant in your garden. So basically they eat everything, a lot of things. But despite that, there's still some of the bagworms that only feeds on a certain plants, but most of the bagworms you can find in the States, they almost feed everything.
Okay, let's see here. So I have a question. So if a female bagworm cocoon gets hit by the rain, will it fall?
The short answer is no. So basically, like Akito just mentioned, they have this very unique character, silk. They use this kind of silk to not just build their case, but also at the same time they kind of use this silk to fix them on the branch. So imagine if there's a bagworm hanging on the branch, it looks like something hanging like this, but actually at the attach point of the branch, they use silk to wrap up the branch very tightly. So basically, it's a locked attachment. So, during strong winds, strong rains, it can be like shaky, but they're not gonna fall off because they already have them fixed.
I'll say too that they're really good at repairs. So when we bring them into the lab, sometimes when they get really big and we're checking if they've made a pupa or not yet, we'll use scissors and very carefully kind of cut open the bag to peek inside. And if there's still a caterpillar in there, um, after we've checked, we leave it alone and come back and they'll have stitched that back up. They'll have sort of re-sealed their bag. So they're very good at making repairs and kind of keeping the elements out of their bags.
All right, I have a question from Joanne Martinelli's group here. She is asking why, and I think this question is really good. This, you guys might not even have the answer to this, or this is what you're studying, which is awesome. Is why do some females have wings and some do not?
I can give you the short answer, which is that we don't know, or I can give you what our hypothesis is. One of the things that we want to test, but I think maybe that. So we know that other moths, females have wings, so they evolved from other species that have wings and must have lost them at some point. And I think that maybe that the bags that they make are just such a good little protection in the environment that it makes sense. It's a good place to lay your eggs. It's a good place to not leave to keep the eggs and the larvae protected, that maybe females no longer needed to leave the bag since they spent all of that time and energy making it as a caterpillar. And so they lost the ability to make wings as an adaptation to stay close to the bag, not leave it, and protect their next generation. But we don't know. Again, this is something we want to look into and test.
Very cool. You guys are figuring this out as we speak, so that's pretty awesome. So I have a question here from Miss Hickman's class. She would like to know, and I think we touched a little bit on this, of how big bagworms can get. But not only that, they would also like to know which parts of the world are they most studied in right now?
That's a really, really good question. So as for the question about asking how big they can grow, it really depends on the species. But for the most common ones you can find in Florida or in the States, I would say probably the largest one can grow up to like 2 to 3 inches for the back. But if you're asking for the largest in the world, I would say the big chunky bagworm I just mentioned from Australia, like can goes up to like 8 or 9 inches, which is like 25 centimeters in total, which is like the size, basically a big chunky guy. And if you're asking like which part of the world have the most well-studied bagworm, I would say it's probably Europe or US because there's biologists or taxonomists. So taxonomist is actually a term for scientists that study species and studies what's the species that we see throughout the observation in the field and trying to describe them. So Europe and US had some great taxonomists and have been doing like bagworm studies since from early 1800s or 1900s. So these are the two most studied place. And the opposite side of the question is if there's a like less study places for bagworms, and definitely. So currently we're not very no we don't know much about bagworms from Africa, South America, or Southeast Asia. The hidden diversity, I can guarantee you, is very, very incredible, but it's just that we don't have much chance to take a deep look at it. So throughout this project, we're also hoping to discover other than the wing loss, evolution of wing loss. Also, we're hoping to discover, new species or new findings throughout this project.
That's awesome. You hear that, guys? Maybe you guys could be the next scientists to study those bagworms in those places. That's pretty cool. I have another great question here. Do some bagworms need to be in a certain temperature to survive?
Well, um, that's a good question. So most of the bagworms you can find in the States, they are kind of pretty uh so-called cold tolerated. So they can bear to like very cold temperature. If you think of the northern states, the low temperatures we have in northern states here. So they can really bear to really low temperatures, but also there's some bagworms that only restricted, to like tropical areas. So there's definitely some species are more heat tolerated, and there's definitely some species are more cold tolerated. So yeah.
All right. I have another great question here. Um, so after they build the casing, right? Then they built it. They've used materials from nature. So the question is, do those materials, do they decompose, and do they have to like every certain time, like, just like we have to do a fixer-upper in our house, do they have to like keep up with that?
So I could take this one. So often, yeah, because of their silk and because their sort of ability to make these amazing cases, we oftentimes find old cases kind of hanging around. And I don't know like how old they are, and oftentimes I don't think we actually know, but often we think they've been probably there for maybe a year or maybe even more sometimes. And so when we go look for bagworms, it's super fun, and it's just like we're walking around looking for stuff. But about half the time, or maybe even more, we'll find a bag and we'll be like, "Oh, there's a bagworm," and we go to it and we realize, oh, it's one that has you know uh, finished. So it's no longer in the bag because it's already gone through development. So we oftentimes find those kinds of things. But they definitely stick around for a very long time, and you'll find these old bags often on plants and other places.
All right. I have a pretty straightforward question, I think, because we know so little about bagworms yet. So we're still, sounds like we're still learning a lot. But someone asks how, let's see, Miss Stanhope's students want to know how many eggs can they have at one time?
Yeah, so I can take that one. So it varies, of course, like everything. But the winged female species actually lay fewer eggs than the wingless ones that we were showing. So some of those ones, like the evergreen bagworm and the Abbott's bagworm, the big kind of grubby females, they will lay a ton of eggs, like 5 to 700 eggs they can produce. So the ones that this is another reason when we talked earlier about why they lost their wings is maybe they're just investing more in having more offspring, laying more eggs, because it seems like the wingless ones lay a lot more eggs than the winged ones do.
Can
Very
I
interesting. Yeah, go ahead,
Alvaro, can I
Akito.
interject here something? So since we were talking earlier about Lepidoptera and Lepidopterist, I just wanted to mention that there was a Lepidopterist that was really interested in the number of eggs that Lepidoptera lay. And there's this moth called a ghost moth. It's this really big, kind of bizarre looking moth. And this Lepidopterist, early on, like 100 years ago, had this moth and put it in a cage and just watched it. And what it does is it just lays eggs. And they actually lay eggs while they're flying. It's an amazing moth that will fly and just drops eggs all over the place. And this Lepidopterist wanted to know how many eggs do they actually produce. So they put this moth in a cage and just counted how many. And the total was something around 12,000 eggs. So some moths can make over 10,000 eggs from one female, which I think is amazing. And you don't see that with butterflies. Butterflies typically, it's like less than 100, but there's some things like that. So nature's amazing.
All right. This is a cool question. So Miss Allison's class wants to know what is the rarest type of bagworm that you have studied?
Yes. So I think from now we're trying, like Akito just mentioned in the presentation, now we're working on some like very exciting or very bizarre new species that we found in Costa Rica. So most of the bagworms you found in in the world, they have this big bags that you would expect after this sort of webinar, you would expect to see, you have a rough image of what a bagworm should look like. It should be something hanging on the tree with the actual bag, right? But there's one really interesting bagworm that we found in Costa Rica. So they have this really weird looking. They're like a noodle, so we often just call it noodle bagworm. So basically, they build a bag. It's like very thin and very long and slender. So it's a. I think this is one of the most um, impressive bagworms that we found in the field, and we're trying to describe the species and trying to make it uh, uh, trying to trying to put out the findings as soon as we can, but I would say that would be probably the most exciting one that we found so far. Yeah.
This question's pretty awesome because it's related. The students are they're starting to make some connections here, guys, with what you're telling them. And check this out. This is a pretty good hypothesis. Let's see. So Miss Allison's group just posted. Let's see. Is there a correlation between the winged bagworms laying less eggs than the non-winged laying more eggs to the ability to fly? So her students seem to think that the number of eggs may be related to the ability to fly.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And that's a really good insight from you guys. And I think you're probably right. Again, this is something we're still testing, but yeah, you can think about when the caterpillar is, eating all the plants and growing, it's basically kind of, it needs all of that energy to grow different body parts, right? And so, we don't know for sure, but it makes sense to me, and it sounds like it makes sense to you guys as well, that if you're spending the energy making wings, making those flight muscles and flying around, that's energy you can't spend on making more eggs. So maybe the ones that don't have wings are just taking all of that extra, the nutrients and energy they're taking in as caterpillars and investing that in making more eggs instead. I think that's a really great hypothesis.
That's awesome, guys. Love how you're thinking. All right, so this is a interesting one. So, can the bagworms use poison ivy leaves to help protect them in their casings?
I think so far we're not. I'm not. At least I'm not very certain if there's a bagworm actually use poison ivy leaves to build a bag. But if you look at the bags that we found, normally the bags that we normally found in the field, oftentimes they're very tough and they're very like a very good protection for the bagworms already. And most of the times, their predators are other parasitic wasps. So basically, even if they build like very, very strong bags, it's not very, you know, powerful to defend themselves against those wasps. So I mean, what I'm trying to say is that the case they're building is already very tough and very strong enough, and I don't think I know any other bagworms that actually use poison ivy leaves, but that could be a good protection as well. I mean, from us Lepidopterists trying to collect them.
Cool. All right. It's all been great about the bagworms. Let's see if they, because this question, it's like Miss Allison wants to know if they can impact, like, if do they have any impacts to farms or other plant industries?
Yes, so that is also one very, very good questions. So oftentimes bagworms were recognized as pests, actually. So here in the States, the evergreen bagworms is they mostly feeds on juniper tree, and juniper tree happens to be one of the most popular plants that people put in their yards or like Christmas decorations and stuff. So for juniper tree farms, the evergreen bagworm can be a really headache, really like issue, the pest issue. So for sure, there's studies trying to figure out what's the best way, to for people are not really, people don't really want the bagworms on their juniper tree. Some of the studies are trying to know how can we do some pest control with it. And also in Southeast Asia, they have good oil palm industries. And there's also a species there's also a bagworm species that is a very notorious pest of the oil palm industry. So there's also studies in Southeast Asia trying to get rid of those bagworms in their oil palm fields as well.
All right. Have time for just a couple more questions. Let's see. Ms. Wrigley's group asks if the eggs are laid in the bags, how do they get out?
Yeah, so the bag is really kind of more like a tube that's open on both ends and that they'll close off the top of when they're done eating. But the bottom is open. When they molt, they shed their skin. It has to drop out of the bottom of the bag. Also, the males, when they emerge as adult moths, they come out of the bottom of the bag. So there is a small opening there at the bottom, and so the larvae, after they hatch, even if they're laid inside the bag, can crawl out that bottom because they're very small when they come out too.
Can I also add one thing about that? Some people have wondered about how they poop and where does the poop go? And so what Andrew just mentioned, the two openings, one of the openings on the bottom side of the bag is oftentimes used for the frass, which is another word for uh, Lepidoptera poop, but they will release the poop from that opening so that the poop doesn't stay inside the bag because you don't obviously want to have that in your house, right? You want to, so it's essentially like a toilet. They just released that way.
All right, guys. We are out of time. Wow. Such amazing questions. Um, Keep those minds and that curiosity going because you had amazing questions. All right. I want to congratulate you all. So I'm going to turn it over to Lexi.
Thanks so much, everybody. We also want to thank everyone for joining us today and hope to see you for our next installments of the Unbagging the Biology of Bagworm series. We'll be touching on heredity and reproduction standards on October 7th for what are bagworms and what does their life cycle look like, as well as the diversity and evolution of living organism standards on November 4th when we do a live Bagworm BioBlitz event. And they're both at the same times as today. And then you can learn more as well as register for the events at the Scientists in Every Florida School website. So scan the QR code on the left there. And then a recording of today's live stream will also be available on the Tessie YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@UFTessie. And thank you again for hanging out with us today and to our partners. So we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.